Hello, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Ryobi PWV201B 18V cordless wet dry vac. So let's get started. Starting off at the bottom of the vacuum, we have the 4 canister wheels. Overall, these canister wheels will do their job, but I wouldn't really beat them up too much. They don't feel overly tough, and I don't think that they're really designed to take a beating, so just be careful. And next up, we have this mysterious little metal chain. Now, I'm not really 100% sure what it's used for, since I couldn't find any information online or in the manual about it. My working theory is that it's used to prevent stack electricity from building up on the housing of the vacuum cleaner by grounding it to whatever surface you're working on top of. But until we know for sure, that's really my only idea, since it doesn't really attach to anything. Okay, moving on. On top of one of the canister wheels, on one of the corners, there's an area where you can store 2 accessories. Now, you can either store both of the cleaning tools or 2 wands, whatever your personal preference is. Or if you have the newer model, you can store the one particular extendable wand, whatever you want to choose. But this is just another area where you can store attachments. Moving upward, on either side of the body, we have the latches for keeping the lid in place. Overall, these latches seem like that they're made out of a good quality plastic, and they do a good job of keeping the lid firmly in place. This will definitely be useful for when you're transporting liquids, and I think it creates a fairly good seal. So overall, I think the latches are good on this particular wet dry vac. And moving on, we have the vacuum port at the front of the vacuum. Overall, the port itself is a good port. It's a locking style port, meaning that once you insert the hose, you twist it and it will firmly lock into place. So that's a good thing. This will help keep liquids from falling out or accidentally detaching the hose. So it's a good design. The issue with the design, however, is where the port itself hooks into the body of the vacuum cleaner. This area is made out of a very thin metal which bends super easily, and because of how much force you have to use to insert the hose and to twist it into place to lock it firmly, you're going to end up bending that metal fairly quickly. You can already tell from the picture and video that the port on mine has already begun to, well, bend, and I think eventually, if it has enough use, it will become a failure point. So just keep that in mind, that this area probably needs to be reinforced or, well, handled with care. I really think Ryobi should have went with a plastic storage tank, at least at this price point, because quite frankly, the metal one just is not tough enough for this particular situation. So just FYI. Okay, let's move on to the hose. Overall, the hose is, well, it's there, and that's about all you can say for it. It's about 5 feet long, and it's made out of a fairly cheap plastic. I don't think it's the absolute cheapest hose they could have put on here, but I think it comes fairly close to that title. For me personally, I really prefer the expandable hoses that you'll find on some of the other shop vacs, like from the Heart I reviewed a couple weeks ago, or even Ryobi's other shop vac that they offer. I think the expandable style hoses are just higher quality, and they're nicer to work with, and they store easier. So for me personally, the hose really is kind of a weak point on this vac. Oh, and another weak point for this hose is the fact that the end point on it is not compatible with Ryobi's dust ports, meaning you can't hook this into, say, a sander or miter saw and have it collect the dust. So that's another drawback to this particular hose. Okay, moving on to the storage tank. The storage tank is adequate. I personally prefer having plastic storage tanks simply because they don't dent up as easily, and I think they're just more durable. But I know some people prefer these stainless steel tanks. However, I will say that the people that prefer the stainless steel tanks probably aren't going to be a huge fan of this particular one just because of how thin it is. Overall, the thinness of this particular stainless steel tank is a little bit too thin in my opinion. It is very easy to dent and very easy to bend, and it's going to be an issue. The rim especially is easy to bend if you're trying to unplug or plug the hose in when the lid is off. So I would definitely only unplug or plug the hose in when the lid is attached. So overall, the storage tank is adequate. It's just not what I personally would have liked to have seen on a mobile shop vac. Okay, moving on to the inlet port. Overall, the inlet port actually is fairly well designed on this particular shop vac. I haven't had it get jammed up with anything, and it does a good job of keeping debris from it getting sucked into the filter right away when it first enters the tank. So overall, I think the inlet port actually is a good port. So another pro. Okay, moving on to the seal on the bottom side of the lid. Now, the seal on this particular vacuum cleaner is actually fairly good. I haven't had any issues with the loss of suction or any sort of liquid spills due to the seal, and so I think it does its job just fine. So overall, another pro. Okay, moving on to the filter. Overall, the filter does a fairly good job, even if it isn't a HEPA filter, and it will definitely help keep the suction power going since it's a nice large filter. Overall, I would still be very careful with this particular filter because replacing this filter will cost you a grand total of, well, about $18. So definitely not on the cheap side, but it's a good filter and it locks firmly into place, so this is another good feature of this vac. Okay, moving on to the float assembly. Overall, it uses a cup-style float assembly, and it does a good job. I didn't notice any water coming out of the blower port or any water dripping out of the vacuum port on the underside of the lid, so overall, I think the float assembly is good. And moving on to the top of the vacuum cleaner, we have underneath this little compartment lid that flips up a 18-volt battery slot, which will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries. Overall, I really do like having this compartment and the fact that it covers the battery. It will definitely protect the battery from any sort of splashes that might occur while working in a damp environment. So another pro. Moving on, we have the carrying handle. Overall, the carrying handle is actually fairly nice. It has more than enough strength to be able to carry the vacuum cleaner when it's full of liquids, and it does a good job of folding down and being compact. So overall, I do like the carrying handle on this vacuum. Next up, we have the on-off switch. It's a nice, large, oversized on-off switch, which is easy to operate when using gloves or with your bare hands, or even if your foot if you need to. So overall, another good feature. And next up, we have the onboard tool accessory storage points. Now, technically, some of these points are only designed for certain tools, and you won't be able to put any other tools, but some of them you can put a variety of different tools in it. Probably the biggest issue, however, would be the fact that some of these points overlap with some of the other points, meaning that sometimes you'll render one spot or even two spots completely worthless because you won't be able to access them because you have something else in a different storage point. Typically, Ryobi does a fairly good job with the design of their onboard tool storage. Look at their grinders and circular saws when it comes to that, and where they store the wrenches and Allen keys. But for this particular vacuum, I really think maybe somebody took a little bit too long of a lunch break or spent a little bit too much time at the water cooler and a little bit less time at the designing desk like they should have. I really do like this vacuum cleaner, and I'm glad it has the external tool storage. I just think that they should have spent a little bit more time in planning and executing the design. And next up, we have the wands or wand, depending on which year model you got. Last year's model came with 3 plastic wands, which all work fine and are good. And this year's model comes with an aluminum telescoping wand, which I have not used and I have no idea how good it is. The other difference is this year's model comes with an additional brush attachment, and I can't speak to the usefulness of that either. But overall, I really do like having wet dry vacs with wands, so I'd consider this a pro. Okay, next up we have the tools or the accessories. Now, the floor attachment or tool is decent and it does a decent job. I personally would have designed it a little bit differently, but I do like the fact that the brush attachment on the bottom side of it is removable. However, if you do remove it, it takes quite a bit of force to remove, and once you remove it, it leaves 2 large gaps on either side at the ends, which air will go in, decreasing the amount of suction you have for getting that dirt into the vacuum cleaner. So overall, the design is rather lacking here. Now, the crevice tool, well, I don't know if you can really call this a crevice tool. This is a crevice tool. What Ryobi included here is well, it's a tool for getting into slightly narrower areas than what you can with the hose. Overall, it's okay. It's just not, in my opinion, a great crevice tool. But, like I said, that's my opinion. Okay, weight-wise, the tool with all the accessories without a 4 amp hour battery weighs right around 8.5 pounds, and with a 4 amp hour battery, the vacuum cleaner will weigh a little over 10 pounds. Now, size-wise, when you compare it to Ryobi's P770 wet dry vac, it's definitely a smaller vacuum cleaner. The storage capacity is smaller, and just about every other thing is smaller as well. It is a little bit taller, but only by an inch or so, so it's definitely more compact. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the kind of power that this cordless 18-volt wet dry vac has. Now overall, the performance actually is fairly decent considering the voltage. It does a good job picking up dirt, sand, sawdust, small bits of rocks and leaves, and pet hair and grass. Quite frankly, it does a good job, and I didn't really have any major issues with anything except for wood shavings that are too big to fit in the opening and metallic objects such as coins, screws, nuts, washers, that sort of stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that you don't typically want to vacuum up anyway, so I don't really think that's that big of a downside. So overall, I'm fairly happy with the performance on the dry side of things with this wet dry vac. Okay, let's talk about the performance when it comes to liquids. Overall, this little wet dry vac actually does a fairly decent job. Now, it's not going to win any awards for being fast or even how much it can hold, but for the average person who is just needing to clean a sink out or possibly drain a couple of pipes in the basement, it'll do a decent job. Now, it'll be able to hold right around 3.7 gallons worth of liquids, and that's fairly decent. It can't hold the advertised 4.7 because it just can't do that because of the way that shop vacs are designed, and you really can't expect it to because then you'd have to expect them all to do that, and that's just unreasonable according to manufacturers. So overall, the performance isn't horrible. It does take its time sucking up liquids, and it's not as fast as a corded wet dry vac, but you really can't expect that with 18 volts of power either. So overall, on that side of stuff, it's fairly decent. Now, there is a leak that takes place right where the hose hooks into the body, and you'll get a drip about every 10 seconds or so. Now, this isn't a deal breaker, and it's a fairly common issue with a lot of shop vacs, and this one actually does a fairly decent job with its locking design. So overall, it's definitely not a deal breaker, it's just another little issue that you have to be aware of. Okay, let's set a speed record for the pros and cons. Decent size. Overall, the size is decent. It's bigger than a lot of other cordless shop vacs on the market, and so I definitely think that this is a pro. 18 volts. Overall, 18 volts I think is definitely a pro. It's a good voltage, and there's a lot of power that you can have with 18 volts, and if you want to adapt batteries over from another brand, you can do that. So overall, I definitely think 18 volts is a good voltage for this vacuum. Easy to clean. Because it has a stainless steel tank, it makes it a lot easier to clean than, say, a plastic tank would be. So that would definitely be a pro in my opinion. Wands. Overall, I really like the fact that this vacuum comes with wands. Whether or not you're getting the new one that has the extendable telescoping wand or the old one that comes with the 3 plastic wands, either way, having wands is definitely a nice feature and one that you don't find on cordless vacuum cleaners a whole lot. Blower port. Overall, the fact that this vacuum cleaner has a blower port is definitely a nice feature to have. I really like vacuum cleaners that have blower ports and not a venting system. So overall, the blower port is definitely a pro. And the next pro would be the price. Overall, the price of this vacuum cleaner is around $70 US to $80 US. I think this is actually a very good price considering the capacity of this vacuum cleaner, and you will be hard pressed to find any other cordless vacuum cleaner that has the same capacity in this price range. Runtime. Overall, the runtime of this vacuum cleaner is right around 16 to 17 minutes of good usable power and around 17 to 18 minutes before the battery dies completely. So I think that's actually a fairly decent amount of runtime considering the price point of this vacuum. And the first meh is the crevice tool. Overall, I really am not a huge fan of the crevice tools that Ryobi includes with their tools. I don't think they're long enough, and I don't think they're skinny enough. Overall, I really would have preferred a different crevice tool, but it works in a pinch, so that's why it's on the meh list. And next up we have suction. Overall, the suction of this is not bad, but it's not good either. Overall, it'll complete the jobs that you have for it. It's just not going to excel at any of them, so it's just meh. And the first con would be the durability of the hose and tank. Overall, as long as you take care of them, I don't think you're going to have any major issues. It's just one of those things where I really think they should have spent a little bit more money in making them a little bit stronger and a little bit more reinforced. And maybe including the expandable hose rather than the stiff plastic hose that was included. And the last con would be the accessory storage. Overall, I'm glad it has the accessory storage. I just really would have preferred a better laid out design. There's points where one accessory point will overlap with another accessory point, rendering one accessory point completely useless. So overall, I really would have preferred a better design. It's not really that big of an issue, it just is a con in my opinion. And that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this wet dry vac. Overall, I have to say, I really actually do like this wet dry vac. Other than the 2 issues that I noted earlier, it is a good little wet dry vac, and I think it actually does a good job. It did a good job of cleaning up messes and debris, whether it be on carpet or on a hardwood floor or in the dirt even sometimes, and I really think that you can get into a lot of spaces that you wouldn't be able to get a typical cordless wet dry vac because it has the wands. Overall, the storage tank capacity is actually fairly decent for its size, and especially if you compare it against other portable wet dry vacs. So I really do think it's a decent wet dry vac, and I really would recommend it, especially for the price point. Coming in right around $70 to $80 depending on what the sale is currently at, it is a good little platform to be in. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this does seem to be a seasonal vacuum, meaning that some of the year you won't be able to find it. So just keep that in mind. I would definitely recommend it to anybody who is looking for a cordless wet dry vac who is in the Ryobi system or doesn't mind adapting batteries. So it does come recommended. And thanks for watching. Sorry this video didn't turn out to be as well polished as I typically like, but I ended up having to remake the video because the original video, the editing timeline got corrupted and I had to completely redo it. So thanks for bearing with me, and we'll see you next week. God bless.